Live weekly coverage of City Club is made possible in part by TCI and is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
I want to talk about pragmatism and reality. You know, first of all, there's one reality. Natural resources of parks and streams require attention and maintenance. It is required to sustain the quality we expect. The second reality, regardless of your feelings about the tools, the available tools are the referendum and the lottery. Those are the only available tools to assure adequate, stable state funding for our parks and streams. We need to use those tools for the preservation of our parks and streams. I second the motion to adopt the minority report.
Now comment against the motion.
I'm Don Sterling, member of the City Club, and I'm against the minority report. I think the majority of the committee should be commended for having the courage to, on principle, to recommend against Measure 66 when most of us, I think almost all of us, favor the ends of Measure 66, preserving parks and preserving salmon. But the majority has pointed out the very serious flaws in this measure. They rightly have reviewed the ways in which the City Club has previously found that the misuse of the initiative is undermining sound government in Oregon. I agree with everything that they said. I want to focus just on the lottery question. The lottery in Oregon is a curse. It's a tax which we levy on the poor and the uninformed. In my view, the City Club should do nothing to allow the lottery to burrow more deeply into the flesh of Oregon when we should be trying to find ways to get it out. I say no on the minority report and no on the measure.
I'm Bob Shoemaker, a member of the club, and I'd like to speak in favor of the minority report. And I speak with some reluctance because I'm a member of the Oregon Initiative Committee, which is fighting to change our rules so that the Constitution of our state cannot be so easily amended. Notwithstanding that, we are where we are, and sometimes politics is said to be the art of the possible. And since 1980, it has not been possible to support parks as we must do. And I suspect that it will also prove not possible within our legislature to support salmon protection as we must do. We're talking about the importance of having stable, long-term funding. And the majority recognizes the importance of that. Even if the legislature in one of its biennial sessions were to support parks and salmon, that would not be stable nor long-term. And the next time around, you'd be right back into the priority battles. If we're going to have stable, long-term funding, we've got to do it by dedicating monies. The lottery offers those monies, like it or not. And I don't like the lottery, but we've got it. Let's use it responsibly. Please vote in favor of the minority report. Thank you.
There's some talking going on in the back of the room that's making it difficult for everybody to hear the comments, so please quiet down. Yes, BJ?
BJ Seymour, City Club member. Like the minority, I'm very much in favor of parks and of funding them. But I have serious doubts about locking in a particular percentage of any fund, especially in the Constitution, because we can't know now what kinds of crises might face us, or we might face, within the next 15 years before this measure sunsets. In a previous ballot measure, we talked about putting a specific percentage of the general fund into schools. And there again, I wasn't against schools, but I think, and I said at that time, that we need to budget for needs as they exist at the time we're doing the budget. When I was a lobbyist, I watched the legislature spend months fine-tuning the state budget within Ways and Means because we have needs that come up and that have to be met. And to determine that a specific percentage, even of lottery funds, be locked into the Constitution for 15 years, I have to say, I think is a bad idea.
Jeff Pampush, member, Director of Oregon Trout, and Chief Petitioner for Measure 66. I and a number of others have worked since 1989 before the legislature, asking that body to address these critical needs for Oregon. Our natural resources are what we brag about in this state. And what I have repeatedly found, we proposed mechanisms from an excise tax on plastics to this last legislative session, a nickel for nature by increasing the refundable deposit on bottles and cans, and each time the legislature has said no. This is the reason that we finally took this measure to the people of Oregon. The Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act threaten the very economic viability of this state. This measure will provide critical funds to take our own destiny into our hands rather than to continue to accept the federal intervention on which we are on the cusp of accepting statewide. Just yesterday I was in a meeting with the governor, other stakeholders, and Speaker Lundquist. And when the governor asked Speaker Lundquist whether or not funding would be available from the legislature if Measure 66 failed, his response was, "It's going to be very difficult, Governor, very difficult." I urge us to support the minority report. Thank you.
Catherine Smith-Root, City Club member and member of the Ballot 66 Measure Study Committee majority. I'd like to emphasize again that Measure 66 suffers from both a lack of flexibility and too much flexibility at the same time. First, there is a lack of flexibility in the measure because there is an absolute requirement for dedicating 15% of lottery funds to parks and watersheds that is locked into the Constitution. These provisions can't be changed without further constitutional amendment, even if the economy sours. The legislature would have no ability to vote to divert these lottery funds to other spending priorities. Second, we believe that there is too much flexibility in the measure because final decisions about spending for actual concrete projects are turned over to local authorities, specifically local watershed councils, without any stated criteria for how to prioritize projects and without any clear definition of mechanisms to determine and prioritize needs on a statewide basis. For these reasons and the other reasons stated by the majority, we urge you to reject the minority opinion and adopt the majority report. Thank you.
Dan Goldie, City Club member. I rise to support the minority report in this instance, even though I'm on the statewide committee for initiative reform. And we believe that constitutional amendments should not be done by initiative, and if they are, there ought to be bigger margins. However, what the majority recommendation fails to take into account is the fact that the lottery fund allocations are already written into the Constitution. And if you want to change them, you've got to change the Constitution, and that's what this proposes. Now, Jane Cease mentioned the environmental groups that support Measure 66. I want to add to that the fact that the Oregon Forest Industries Council also supports 66. As a person who was the Director of Economic Development in this state, I want to tell you that the protection of parks, salmon, the objectives, carrying out the objectives of Measure 66 would do a great deal for the economic development of this state, preserving the kind of environment that we all want to live in. I recommend that we vote in favor of the minority report and not support the majority report. Thank you.
I'm David August, City Club member and Vice Chair of the Ballot 66 Measure Committee. Our committee, along with other committees studying ballot measures, were charged with gathering information, both verbal and written, hearing both sides of the issue, analyzing the information, and then coming to some conclusions. Part of that analysis required looking at relevant City Club positions, if there are any. 15 of our fellow members spent over 1 year looking at the initiative and referendum in Oregon. It is an outstanding and well-reasoned report. No matter how you vote today, I implore every one of you, before making your actual ballot choice on Measure 66, you should read or reread this report, or at the very least, the executive summary and pages 29 to 32 that specifically discuss constitutional amendment statutes and the budgetary process. Thank you.
Doug Marker, City Club member, I rise in support of the minority report. My concerns here, while agreeing with the principles of the report and wishing to commend the committee for the report, my concern for the crisis of the situation. This year, we have populations winking out in the Grand Ronde, in the Imnaha, in the Elastine. We have a crisis in salmon restoration in Oregon, and we have two ways to go. We can have a regulatory approach, or we can enlist the help of landowners and stakeholders in the watersheds of Oregon for cooperative efforts. But they need funding to initiate that effort, to conduct the necessary analysis, to respond to the criteria that the committee notes are so important. And for that reason, the state must step in with additional support or risk additional confrontation on land use over the salmon restoration issue.
I'm Jay Formick, City Club member, and while City Club is going to take a symbolic stand on this issue, the real point I think we need to consider is, where is the leadership on funding for these projects in our state? I ask John Kitzhopper, Lynn Lundquist, and Brady Adams, where are you on this issue? Let's let City Club send a clear signal to the leaders of this state. Let us lead our leaders. Let us send them the signal that use of lottery funds for this purpose is unacceptable, that we expect them to follow through and make the funds available through whatever means they may choose. They're the leaders. Let them make the decision. Thank you.
My name is Mike Hauk, City Club member, and I'd like to inform you that the Audubon Society of Portland also supports the minority report in supporting Measure 66, and I would add that we wrestled with the same issues, the very valid issues of concern that were raised by the majority report. However, for reasons you've already heard today, we support passage of Measure 66. We do share some of the specific concerns raised about the ability that were raised earlier of watershed councils to carry out some of the restoration work. I sit on the Columbia Slough Watershed Council. I am fully aware of the limitations of watershed councils. However, the value that would be provided to those councils and other groups that are working on restoration far outweigh the defects that have been pointed out. Finally, to those who would question using funds which might otherwise go to economic development projects, I would argue that nothing supports a strong Oregon economy more than healthy states park system, restored streams and rivers, and enhanced green spaces in both urban and rural Oregon. Expecting the state legislature to act on these issues, as you have heard today, is not realistic. We are in a crisis. We've had a recent steelhead listing in the metropolitan region. There will be more listings. We need a long-term source of funds to address those issues. We urge support for the minority report. Thank you.
I'm Pamela Gesme Miller, City Club member. I again want to emphasize that yesterday the governor asked Speaker Lundquist if he would support a budget request for the Oregon plan if Measure 66 failed. His response was that it was going to be a difficult fight for funding. Without the passage of Measure 66, the Oregon plan, showing so much promise across rural and urban landscape, is likely to come to a grinding halt. I urge your support of Measure 66 and thereby support the minority report. Thank you.
Bill Hutchison, City Club member, promised to talk fast. 2:30 this morning when I couldn't go to sleep, I came up with these thoughts. I share the governor's concern that we don't like funding government by lottery. I don't like the idea of amending the Constitution by initiative, and I don't like an out-of-context kind of solution to this problem. But two factors persuade me to recommend the minority report. In the current legislative embattled environment, where we can't get a transportation plan, where a governor has trouble getting his appointees approved, where we are governing essentially by veto, and where we have an emergency, as other speakers have described, where we have growth coming in big numbers, and we want to sensitize people to the importance of our parks and get them in place and well structured before this occurs, where we have a problem that we've deferred solving too long, and where there's no reasonable promise of a reasonable solution in 1999, and where our commitment to natural resources is already too low relative to other matters. I think we need the minority report. These thoughts have stood the test of time. I still have them at 12:30.
Thank you very much for all of your comments. Now, are we ready for the question? All right, the question has been called for, so we'll now proceed with a vote on substitution of the minority recommendation for the majority of recommendation. So, those of you who are in favor of substituting the minority recommendation, that is, if you're for passage of Measure 66, please raise your voter cards now. Thank you. All those who are opposed to substitution of the minority recommendation, that is, those who would like a no vote on Measure 66, raise your cards now. Okay, we better count. It's close enough to have to count. All right, we'll start again with those in favor of substitution of the minority recommendation for Measure 66. Please raise your cards now. Keep your hands up. We're almost done here. Minute longer. You can change hands if you want to, but keep the card up. Some people are either changing their minds or tiring. Keep them up. All right, thank you. Now, all those opposed to substitution of the minority report, that is for a no vote on Measure 66, raise your cards now. Almost done. All right, thank you. I need the staff to let me know the vote. Yes or? Okay, the substitution passes. So the minority recommendation is substituted for the minority recommendation. Now we need to do our second report. For all of you who are in favor of the report being published with the minority recommendation, so the position of the club will be a yes vote on Measure 66, please raise your cards again, please. So those of you who voted for should vote again for. I'm sorry we got to do it twice. Thank you. Now all of those, thank you very much. All of those who are opposed to publication of this report with the City Club position being a City Club position being a yes vote on Measure 66, if you're opposed to that position being taken by the club, raise your cards now. All right, clearly a majority of the club membership here today votes in favor of publication of the report with the minority recommendation. That is, the club's position is now a yes vote on Measure 66. Now thank you for the report, Jane and Jeanette, and for everybody's comments today. Now on to the candidate debate portion of the program. I want to thank the City Club of Newburgh, the League of Women Voters of Oregon, and the Oregon Alliance for Better Campaigns for working with us to make this debate possible. I want to encourage the guests who are here today to join our organizations. The more people who get involved in our elections, the better our candidates and our officials will be, and ultimately the better off our communities will be. Now, the candidate debate will have several sections. First, each candidate will give a 3-minute opening statement. They've already drawn straws to determine the order of the opening and closing statements. Following the opening arguments, the opening statements, the candidates will respond to questions from the panel. Our questioners today are Fran Storrs, a member of the Board of Governors of the City Club of Portland, and Claudia Stewart, who is president of the City Club of Newburgh. Now, the questions were submitted in advance by the sponsoring organizations. Those will be the only questions today, no questions from the floor. And of course, the candidates have not seen these questions in advance. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to the question. Following the answer, the opposing candidate will have the option of a 60-second rebuttal. Following the panel questions, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask 2 cross questions of the other. Now, following the rotation of the candidate questions, each candidate will make a 3-minute closing statement. I know that I don't need to remind you that we don't want to hear any hissing, booing, or name-calling. Now, please hold your applause till the end of the program. Ron Wyden served as congressman of the 3rd District of Oregon until he resigned to run for Senate to complete Bob Packwood's term. His campaign with Gordon Smith was a bitter, negative campaign, and I think I can speak for all of us when I say that we're happy to see that our 2 senators have been able to cooperate in the Senate, particularly to fight for continued funding for mass transit and other Oregon projects, and we haven't seen a return of the negativity that we saw in the prior campaign. Now, in the Senate, Mr. Wyden has been very active, continuing his support for seniors, and he was the sole Senate sponsor of the Internet Tax Freedom Act, which was passed by Congress just this week and which will place a 3-year moratorium on new Internet taxes by federal, state, and local governments. I've heard a lot of good things about John Lim. Most recently, John has been a state senator, originally elected in 1992 and re-elected in 1996. He was named Assistant Majority Leader in 1995. In the state legislature, he's sponsored legislation promoting a balanced budget amendment, limiting state-sanctioned gambling, and creating an international trade commission in Oregon. He serves on the Western Evangelical Seminary Board of Regents, where he previously received his Master's of Divinity degree and his doctorate in humane letters. He also serves on the Board of Trustees of George Fox University. Now, I'd like to ask the candidates to approach the 2 podiums. We'll begin with an opening statement from John Lim, followed by Ron Wyden.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt your lunch, but there's one candidate that wasn't introduced, and that's me, and I'm Karen Moskowitz. I'm a Pacific Party candidate for U.S. Senate. It's Oregon's Green Party.
Thank you very much.
And I was excluded from this process, and I'm here to debate with the other candidates, except I don't see a chair for myself. So if one of the gentlemen would like to give up a chair, I can talk about all the real issues you're probably not going to hear about.
Peter, let me make clear that when I invited Senator Lim to participate in the debates, I did in fact urge that Ms. Moskowitz and others be allowed to participate.
Thank you very much. It's a City Club policy to invite candidates who are serious candidates, that we typically invite 2 candidates. That's what we've done this time. We feel that the City Club membership and the public is more interested in the 2 principal candidates than other candidates. That's the club position in the beginning of the debates. That's the club position now. This will be a debate between 2 candidates today. Now, let's get started with the opening statement of Mr. Lim. Thank you very much.
Are we okay now? Hi, how are you? Glad to see you here. What a great honor for me as a first generation immigrant from Korea 32 years ago, standing here at the City Club members to debate for U.S. Senate race. I'm running for United States Senate to bring a much needed perspective of a businessman to Washington. I believe it is a great privilege to live in this country running for public office. I worked all type of odd jobs, everything from being a houseboy to a painter and a janitor and a clerk in a mom and pop store. When I visited South Korea several years ago after elected to the state senate, head title in the Korean American, that English newspaper published in Seoul, Korea said, "From janitor to senator," and I like that title very much. I understand what it's like to work hard to make ends meet. I know how much a loaf of bread costs in the supermarket. Through hard work, I built a successful international business and currently represent East Multnomah County in the state senate. Now, I want to take that experience to the U.S. Senate to work for you. As a state senator, I have established a record of accomplishment and earned respect across party lines. I work to expand trade opportunities for Oregon with foreign countries. As a matter of fact, I traveled in that region with Governor Barbara Roberts and Governor Kitzaber to bring more trade, more jobs into our country. I fought also those on welfare to become self-sufficient. In 1990, I established John Lim Scholarship Foundation to help those young students going to college and single mothers who further their education. During my time in Salem, I earned a reputation for honesty, integrity, and independence. Though my choices were not always the popular ones, I have proven that I'm willing to stand against the special interest group to fight for better Oregon. I found myself pitted against the state bureaucracy and powerful business interests that profit gambling when I led efforts to reduce the influence of gambling in our state. My priorities as U.S. Senator would be to keep our federal government working on a balanced budget, saves Social Security, reduce the national debt, and provides tax relief for hardworking Oregonians. Thank you very much, and God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much, and let me thank all City Club members for sitting out there Friday after Friday, practicing good government by listening to scores of politicians debate. You have been exceptionally good citizens, and now that we heard from Bill Hutchison, I guess there are some insomniacs looking for a cure. I'm sure also that many of you have been secretly checking off your calendar, waiting for this, the final debate of the campaign season, so you can leave the Benson when it's over, breathe some fresh air, and say, free at last, free at last. 3 years ago, a special election was scheduled to replace Bob Packwood. As a candidate, I chose to treat that campaign like a job interview with the people of Oregon. And I pledged to take several actions at that time if you hired me. First, I pledged to listen to you, and I've done that. In all of Oregon history, there's never been a United States Senate office other than in Portland and Salem. And I opened one in LeGrand and Bend and Medford. And I held open community meetings in each county each year. The doors to government have never been open wider. Second, I pledged to stand up for you in Washington, D.C., and I've done that. Health care and transportation services are better funded in Oregon because of my work. I wrote a balanced budget proposal that stops both political parties from raiding the Social Security surplus. I developed a bipartisan education plan with Norma Paulus so we could cut the funds for school bureaucracy and put them into the classroom where they belong. And when I made clear that I'd go to the Senate floor and filibuster if senators from back east tried to throw our assisted suicide law in the garbage can, they threw in the towel for now. Finally, I pledged to put good government and common sense ahead of partisanship. Many Oregonians seem to think that if Senator Smith and I served together, it'd be a replay of the Holyfield-Tyson prize fight, and Oregon would end up on the mat. The fact is, we've put politics at a stop with respect to our state and state issues, and our bipartisan cooperation has produced numerous successes. And as for common sense, just this week I persuaded the federal government to buy surplus tuna, helping hard-hit fishing families on the Oregon coast and our needy food banks with one practical solution. Now I appreciate the chance to interview again for the honor of representing the most special place on earth in the United States Senate. Thank you.
Now I appreciate your polite applause. We'll hold the applause now until the end. Now we'll turn the questioning over to our panelists, Claudia Stewart and Fran Storrs. The first question will come of Mr. Lim from Fran Storrs.
Mr. Lim, what accomplishments in the Oregon legislature can you identify that qualify you to be a member of the United States Senate?
I have many qualifications. As a matter of fact, you have one of the best qualifications in our nation to be next to U.S. Senate. First things we did, 1993, welfare reform. There has been more takers than givers. And we gave them the chance to work, that we trained them 6 to 9 months job training program while providing child care. And in 1997, we expanded statewide, and then at this time, 50% welfare roll went down. When we introduced a legislation, people criticized, how can you do that, such a things for the most vulnerable people? But instead, giving them just the food, we're giving them the opportunity to be themselves as a great citizen. I expanded trade opportunity, as already introduced, trade commission we created. In this coming 21st century, without trade, we are going to lose behind. Already, last year alone, we have a $110 billion trade deficit. We're expecting $200 billion trade deficit next year. We just can't do that. We will continue to expand trade in the future, make sure we can compete in the future. Thank you very much.
Same question?
Yes, thank you. I think you have a rebuttal.
I'm especially proud of the fact that I listened to the people of Oregon and I stood up for them. And it resulted in practical accomplishments in Washington, D.C., specifically cutting Medicare waste, writing and passing the Internet Tax Freedom Act, which is going to set the ground rules for the digital economy. I'm proud of the fact that Oregon's getting a fairer shake in terms of transportation. I was the only Oregonian on the conference committee that wrote the surface transportation bill, and we're going to get $111 million more per year as a result. And finally, I wrote the first law to help our watershed councils, which I think is the beginning of a new effort to come up with homegrown, locally driven approaches to protecting our environment.
Thank you. Question to Mr. Wyden.
What two issues can you identify as the most significant big picture problems that Congress must deal with in the next 4 years? And what role do you see for yourself in dealing with these problems?
The two big picture issues that I'd focus on if rehired would be health care and education. Since my days with the Gray Panthers, I've always felt if you don't have your health, you're not in a position to go on and contribute in other ways. And today there are too many citizens falling between the cracks in our health system. They're not old enough for Medicare, they're not poor enough for Medicaid. We've got millions of families that are underinsured and can't afford basic health care. I intend to write a plan that covers all our citizens and build on the Oregon model in doing so. Second, with respect to education, I'm going to get past that proposal that Norma Paulus and I have developed known as EdFlex. We're going to cut the dollars from school bureaucracy and put it into the classroom where they belong and build on the model known as the Oregon option, which gives us a chance to pave our own way in terms of coming up with practical solutions.
As a senior citizen myself, one of the great concerns I have and many Americans have at this time is a Social Security Trust Fund. The trust fund is no more trust fund, it's broken fund. Last 30 years or more so, that the congressman, career politician elected to be responsible to take up this problem, they spent $700 billion Social Security Trust Fund to pay for other government programs. That is not right. I'm going to safeguard, make sure Social Security Trust Fund is a sacred fund for you and for the future generation. Second thing I like to do, we have $5.5 trillion in national debt, which is $20,000 per person from youngest to the adult. Government just spending more than what they bring it in. We must be fiscally responsible. As a small businessman, I can do it. Thank you.
Question of Mr. Lim.
Mr. Lim, $35 million has been budgeted for salmon restoration in the federal budget passed this week. Dam removal on the Snake and Columbia has been a suggested solution. What is your position on dam removal?
Salmon issue is one of the big issues in Northwest area. With the governor, we are working on that the three sovereign solution with the federal government, the state, and the American Indians. We are working together to find a solution. Last 15 years, we spent $3 billion, study after study. Still, we couldn't find the answer. I don't believe $35 billion is enough to resolve this problem. At the same time, that destroying the dam is not the option. Northwest area, we enjoy that one of the lowest electric costs in the nation. We need to continue to do that. When we destroy them, are you willing to pay for a lot of tax dollars from your pocket to pay for electricity? I don't think so. At this time, we don't have a conclusive scientific evidence that the dam is the only cause to reduce the salmon. So that destroying dams is not the option, but we need to study based on science, not on emotions. We will continue to work on that issue.
The Columbia River is our economic lifeblood. I intend to follow the science carefully with respect to protecting our fish, but I'm going to be very cautious with respect to tampering with proven economic benefits for our area. And I do think that there are some win-win solutions with respect to both the fish and economic interests. I got one passed in the United States Senate, and it's my initiative to protect salmon from unscreened irrigation diversions. My common sense solution is to help irrigators screen their diversions so they can pump out water while keeping the fish in the river. The environmental community is for it, farmers are for it, we can come up with win-win solutions to dealing with our river concerns.
Question to Mr. Wyden.
Sustainability is being recognized as critical to the future health of the global economy. Europe and Canada seem to have embraced this concept. What specific action would you support to encourage environmental stewardship in the United States?
With respect to sustainable approaches in terms of natural resources, we have a chance to lead both in the country and in our nation on this issue. For example, the evidence shows that sensible tree planting and reforestation practices can deal with about 1/4 to 1/3 of the global warming problem. Trees, in effect, act as carbon suckers. And again, this is a win-win kind of approach, protecting our environment and also being good for industry. I've led the effort in terms of getting the Clinton administration to put sensible forestry practices on the agenda for dealing with the global warming issue. And last week, Senator Richard Lugar, Republican chairman of the Agriculture, indicated that he would support my efforts.
It is important we preserve our natural resources, which is clean water, clean air, and clean land. Even today's Oregonian, we're talking about the Willamette River, how polluted it is. It is one of the polluted rivers in the nation. We need to clean it up. If we don't do it, then federal government mandates us to clean that up, then it will be impacted all of those people living in that area. Even the Scenic Act, which is about 80 people living Washington and Oregon side area, they are impacted by this special law. We need to look at the Endangered Species Act, which enacted about 32 years ago, that we need to do something good about it. It has been good for the state, but we need to look at it, change some of it to meet the current needs. Thank you.
Question to Mr. Lim.
Mr. Lim, reform of our income tax system was a major concern of the 1998 Congress. What changes in the current tax code would you support to make our tax system less complex and fairer to taxpayers?
Thank you very much. As you already may know, that every day that the federal government, they create 50 more rules and regulations on income tax code. No one knows where we are going in the future. It's a complicated system no one understands. We need to simplify this law so every American people could understand. I think it has been a good thing that instead of we prove it, federal government, they have to prove what they have to do. I believe that sometime in the future, it's understudy flat taxes is one of the options. I'm not supporting it at this time, but that is the area I like to look into the future. So everyone pays fair tax. It is simpler to calculate. I think we need to reform that the tax code, make sure in the future you don't have to go to the CPA to get it done. It must be done by you simply filing just a piece of paper. I think that's the best way to go in the future.
Senator Lim makes a number of practical suggestions, and I tried to support those this year in the comprehensive IRS reform bill. We all know about those scandalous hearings that showed the horrible abuses of taxpayers around the country, and that's why that bill was so needed. But I've also felt it was important to cut taxes. And since coming to the United States Senate, I've cut 19 different taxes. I cut taxes on families with the child tax credit. I cut taxes for those trying to pay for college. I cut capital gains taxes for homeowners. I cut estate taxes for farmers and small businesses. And finally, I think it's clear that without getting that tax code down to something that you can do without a battery of accountants and lawyers, we won't have the reform we've needed in our country. That's what I'll keep working for.
Question to Mr. Wyden.
Why have you supported legislation to protect internet transactions from taxation when it could put tax-paying Main Street businesses at a serious disadvantage when competing with similar non-tax-paying internet vendors?
That's not what my bill does, and that's why Main Street overwhelmingly has come out for our bill. All my internet tax freedom bill does is it protects small businesses. And in Oregon, we have more than 100,000 home-based businesses, and my bill would protect them from discriminatory taxes. What we've seen around the country is because some state officials recognize the revenue potential of the web, is they're trying to single out the internet for much higher taxes than they would subject other transactions for. I'm very pleased that this is the beginning, and I emphasize just the beginning, of trying to write the ground rules for the digital economy. But because we have so many small businesses in our state, I'm very proud of this legislation because it's going to get them a fair shake.
I agree to support that the moratorium for 3 years internet tax. I think that has been a good thing. But as you may know, sometime in the future, that will be a bigger and bigger share that they buy out from the tax systems. In 3 years, we might be able to find a good solution where we are going to do. When they are buying the product through the internet, that doesn't necessarily mean less price. It is more conveniency buying through that way. So at this time, I think it's a prudent and good approach that the Senator Wyden has done. I completely agree with it for 3 years moratorium.
Question of Mr. Lim.
Mr. Lim, the United States has continued to afford China most favored nation trading status despite human rights violations. How would you balance our interests in maintaining trading partners with our concerns for the treatment of another nation's citizens?
As you all know, that the most favored nation status is not anything special at all. It is just a normal trade relationship. We use human rights in conjunction with the most favored nation status. I think it's a prudent approach. Sometimes I'm thinking, we should separate a policy and a trade, but sometimes in real world it does not work. When we trying to get the human rights movement in China, I think it is a good way to make sure when they trying to get the most favored nation status, it's good to pressure them through the human right. I think we have done it in Vietnam and plus many other countries, so that the human right, it is the good thing to do, it tied with the trade.
I think Senator Lim's answer is a thoughtful one. And I would only add that I think the policy of engaging the Chinese at every opportunity with respect to advancing human rights is particularly important. I've always felt that trade is a democratizing force. In effect, just isolating these leaders, I think, will lead to more repression. Now, through the policy of engagement, we'll have plenty of opportunities to advance the cause of human rights. For example, the Chinese are very interested in our support for their entry to the World Trade Organization. And I think one of the things we ought to raise with them as we debate that topic is we're going to consider, for example, their record on human rights when they want our support for matters like entry to the World Trade Organization.
Question of Mr. Wyden.
Individuals and businesses with grazing and mining rights on federal lands pay less than private sector rates for that privilege. Congress has been unable or unwilling to renegotiate these contracts and require a better rate of return. Why should these private businesses continue to pay bargain prices for the use of public lands?
When I went to the Jordan Valley in eastern Oregon to meet with the farmers to talk about grazing, I was the first United States Senator to visit there in more than 40 years. And I had a chance then to listen to them, and I came away particularly concerned that as we raise these fees, and they do have to be raised, we need to be careful to not drive these ranchers and farmers off the land. Because if we do that, we will have even more environmental problems than we already do. So I think what we ought to do is recognize that a realistic increase in the fees is appropriate, but let's also work closely with those ranchers because they're in a position to be much better stewards of the land in the days ahead.
As you know already, that the wheat price went down, that the poultries and whole product went down. They are struggling at this time. I'm not sure what the bargain price, who is going to say what is the bargain price? But ranchers, and they maintain the fence, and plus they have to take care of many other requirements federal government asking them to do. So in conjunction, whole things together, it is not necessarily bargain price. And what's wrong with them? We give them some bargain. They need to play a level playing field, such as Canada and Australia, many other countries. They are supported by the tax dollars from their own government. I think it's prudent we should give the same benefit level playing field.
Question to Mr. Lim.
Mr. Lim, you are largely unknown as a candidate for the United States Senate. How would you characterize your positions on the following social issues: abortion, private school vouchers, and gay rights?
My name, unknown.
Yeah, in 90 seconds.
It's getting there, okay. I have traveled statewide, 36 counties, and I already started the $200,000 TV ad, so it's getting there. Of course, my opponent, he has a big name, big money, so it is very uneven, the campaign. Let me say that the abortion is a gay right issue. I supported that, especially Senate Bill 34, when I was elected to the state Senate first time, that I was one of the few Republicans voted for the same right for the gay right people. Because of that, I got a lot of waffles from the many people throughout the state, because they thought I waffled, but I didn't, okay? And the second abortion issue, I strongly oppose the partial birth abortion, and we need to give parental notification when the minors are having the abortion. And it is more issue of doctors and the patients, more family issue, instead of government dictating them how to do what to do. I strongly oppose partial birth abortion. I want you to know that. Thank you very much.
I have worked to make abortion rare through policies like the adoption tax credit, because there are so many families that do want to adopt a child, but ultimately, I think this question of abortion is a private matter for a woman, and the government ought to stay out. Second, with respect to private school vouchers, I will tell you, when dollars are scarce for public education, which is available to every student, I don't see how you can make an argument that some of those scarce dollars ought to be taken and used for education that not every youngster will be able to afford. Finally, with respect to gay rights, I believe that gay folks ought to have the same rights as everyone else. I'm the principal sponsor in the Senate with Ted Kennedy and Arlen Specter of the Federal Hate Crimes Act, which would help us prevent the kind of tragedies that we saw in Wyoming. We're going to get that bill passed at the beginning of the next session of Congress.
Question of Mr. Wyden.
What responsibility do you believe the United States has to try to stop human rights atrocities and civil wars in other countries like Kosovo? What can be done to make our efforts more effective?
Well, with respect to Kosovo specifically, I'm of the view that Milosevic is a war criminal. We have essentially set out several conditions now. He must withdraw his secret police. He must allow for humanitarian assistance. He must work towards a political solution. I think he is playing something of a rope-a-dope game with our government now, telling us, in effect, he will comply in hopes that he will not face NATO retaliation. I think early next week is going to be the deadline, and if he doesn't comply with those conditions, I would support airstrikes against Milosevic.
Did you say Kosovo or Bosnia?
Kosovo.
Okay, thank you very much. I support the president's action in the matter of Kosovo. I don't believe that the ethnic cleansing is the right thing to do, but simply United States cannot be a world police officer to take care of every human right in each country. We need to watch out on those things. President Clinton promised that our troops will be there 1 year. It has been 3 years already. And then we spent more than $6 billion of our tax money and that the soldiers stations over there. I think we need to pull out as soon as possible. But at this time, the president has a plan to continually removing our forces from there. I do believe that at this time, that they are trying to take a world problem is not simply a solution. Europeans should be solved their problem with their own forces as long as the United States have a special interest in their region.
Question to Mr. Lim.
Mr. Lim, there is no shortage of complaints about health maintenance organizations, but Congress has yet to enact meaningful legislation to require HMOs to provide better health coverage for their clients. As a member of the Senate, what would you propose to reform the system of managed care in this country?
Managed care came into our country to control the price of the cost of the patient because the price has been skyrocketing 10 times more than the consumer price index has been a problem. Because of the situation, managed care came up. At the same time, we got a problem of the right of the patient. When they try to go to the specialist, it has to go through the gatekeeper physician. And in the special emergency situation, just they couldn't go. So I strongly support we need to look at the patient right of bill. I think it's already too late to do that. I will continue to support, make sure, instead of controlling doctors and the HMO hospitals of a patient, it is about time to bring the right to the patient. So I strongly support the patient right of bill, which has been considered in the last Congress.
It's unconscionable that so many of these health decisions now are being made by bureaucrats rather than providers and patients. So in HMO reform, I've worked for 3 changes. First, I was the leader on the Senate floor of trying to end these gag clauses, these clauses in health maintenance agreements that only tell the patients what their cheap options are, not what all of their options are. We got 51 votes on it the first time I brought it up. We needed 60 because of the budget. We're going to get that passed next year. Second, we've worked for fair reimbursement rates for Oregon health plans. We've been penalized for being efficient in the past. We're finally making some changes there. And third, I've been working for something called point of service, which means that the consumer can have more choices. We need more options for the patients, and it's also been popular with providers.
Okay, final question by our panel of Mr. Wyden.
Oregonians believe that Congress has no right to overturn this state's assisted suicide law. Alaskans believe that Congress has no right to dictate environmental and natural resource protections for Alaska wilderness lands. In this example, how do you balance states' rights against national interests?
It's a good question, and the difference is historically, issues with respect to medical practice have been left to the state level. And that's why when Oregonians voted twice with respect to the judgment on assisted suicide, that I felt so strongly about protecting that law. A lot of members of the United States Senate give windy speeches about the 10th Amendment and about how they believe so strongly in states' rights. But what we've learned in the last few weeks is they only believe in states' rights when they agree with what a state is doing. So in the future, I'm going to make sure that our colleagues understand how important what we've done is, and in particular, the proposal that's been made in the United States Senate to overturn our law would really hurt hospice programs, comfort care, and pain management. We've got to defeat it and protect the Oregon law.